we are struggling to some extent to communicate that this is going to be, in some ways, more than just a tweaking of the existing system. In many ways, this is as large as 939. If you look at what we're trying to achieve by 2020, it's to an additional 20 tons per year of material out of landfill. So this is a heavy lift. And it is a question of pricing and economics and utilizing the existing infrastructure to the maximum extent feasible, but it's also really communicating that we do need to start to think about what the next generation of solid waste facilities looks like and how they'll be integrated into communities, how they'll be integrated into California's economy. And so that's the work that we're doing right now. Mark mentioned some work on organics. A very significant portion of what's going to landfill right now is organics, and so we're working very hard to identify the barriers to expanding California's organics recycling infrastructure. So we're working with all of our sister BDOs to do that. We're working with stakeholders. We're working with local governments. One of the things we're hearing fairly regularly is that people want to do this. They want to expand their organics infrastructure, but siting and permitting is the challenge. So we've taken it upon ourselves, again, to take a very hard look at what we can do to facilitate the permitting of additional facilities, but we also need to work with local governments to figure out what it will take to incentivize local governments to do the very hard work of going through the hurdles of siting additional organics infrastructure. 341 is not just about tons, it's about producer responsibility and waste reduction. It's about toxics and waste with special waste with special problems, whether they be litter or toxics. And so we are expanding our work to include all those issues as well. And again, when it comes back to local governments, that's a funding issue. So I think trying to expand our infrastructure in these difficult economic times is imminently doable, but it's challenging, and we need to communicate the economic benefits of these facilities in California. And I think we're well on our way to doing that. So,
thank you, Scott. Well, there's some obvious themes here, and we'll build on. We'll start at the high level and then start drilling down. The big one, obviously, is AB 341 and 341 implementation. Let's start with Mark, and Mark's the one who said, "Just be brutal, for cutting them off." And I will. So, Mark, what does that really mean? 341 implementation.
I think that Gary has touched on it. Actually, all three have touched on this issue in terms of, AB 939 was a landfill diversion policy. It was a reaction to a landfill and, ironically, a failure of incineration to take hold in California. So that was what put it on the table. It wasn't because we had a thoughtful working group that decided, geez, we've got to advance recycling. It was a political reaction that, frankly, we took advantage of to advance this policy that was focused on landfill diversion. Now, AB 341 is a reaction to really a climate change issue, and it gets into some of these bigger issues that Gary was talking about and that Scott has touched on in terms of how do we reduce pollution, how do we conserve resources. And that's why the terminology in AB 341 is different. And it's creating this opportunity for us to kind of take this wonderful infrastructure that we've created and move it to the next level. The other thing that AB 341 brought forward, and one of the selling points that we're, in terms of able to get this ambitious policy through last year, was the jobs issue and the economic development issue. And the idea that we were able to point to examples in this kind of, in the latter phase of AB 939 implementation, of actually developing, siting, manufacturing, and processing facilities in California. And we sold that to the legislature as this is going to be a tool for economic development and job creation in California. So I think what 341 implementation means is we're moving away from the notion that all of this policy has been about landfill diversion and into the notion that this is about resource conservation, it's about pollution reduction. That pollution, to some extent, the reaction was to AB 32 and emission reduction, but also about economic development. So those are the three pillars that I think are driving it.
Gary, Stop Waste has had a 75% directive for years now, since the 90s. How have you adopted the 341 part within your jurisdiction and your responsibilities there? What's the connection?
Well, in 2008, in 2010, when we did our strategic planning process, we talked about the fact that we hadn't quite achieved 75% yet, and it was an objective for 2010. So we're in 2010 saying we haven't achieved our objective yet. What do we do about that? And we concluded pretty quickly that we didn't need to do all that much about that. We're going to achieve 75% eventually. The voter mandate from 1990 was not just to achieve 75%, but to go beyond 75% to whatever future levels of diversion are necessary to create sustainable consumption patterns in Alameda County. So we focused on the big picture and said, okay, whatever would take us to sustainable consumption patterns would certainly pull us the last few percentage points to 75 and beyond. And so in thinking about that, we broke down our work into two areas. One is getting less than 10%, by the year 2020, having less than 10% of what is in the garbage carts or containers, front-load containers, roll-off boxes, etc., less than 10% being materials for which there is a recycling market or an organics market, a composting market. So get the good stuff out of the garbage. And it's a different metric entirely, but that's our focus going to 2020, and our ordinance is built around that. That's actually what compliance with the ordinance means. It means if you have a source-separated compliance pathway, at the source, we look in your garbage cart or container, whatever it is, and you don't have more than 10% good stuff. Or if you follow a centralized processing system, then the MRF has got to be capable of producing a residual which has less than 10% good stuff in it. That's not less than 10% of what came in the front door of the MRF gets thrown away. It's that what gets thrown away has less than 10% marketable materials in it. If there's a market for it, if there's an economy for it, let's get it out of the waste stream. And so it's a very different paradigm, if you will, and that's what our ordinance was built around. And we were building that ordinance long before we thought 341 even had a chance of passing. It took us a year to do an EIR. We scheduled this all in the middle of 2010 that we were going to spend this time to do an EIR and develop the ordinance. And so when 341 was getting near completion and we could see, oh, it might pass, that's great. We were delighted, but that isn't what motivated our ordinance. They were just overlaying sorts of things.
Heidi, so what is AB 341 doing for EPR, or what is EPR's role in implementing 341?
Well, I think the draft plan came out with a strong emphasis on EPR, especially for hazardous waste, which is our priority because it's extremely expensive, it's toxic, it's affecting the health of our solid waste and recycling workers. So we were very, very glad to see that. We also saw it listed for possibly packaging. Packaging is actually where EPR started in the world back in Germany in the late 80s with the Green Dot program. It's not a priority for our organization. We're focused on the household hazardous waste first, but you are going to be hearing a lot of discussion about packaging because it is such a huge volume of material, even though a lot of it is recyclable, and in this state we do have a good, strong infrastructure for much of it. Also, the ocean litter groups are very, very interested because there's so much plastic packaging is ending up as ocean litter. So be part of the discussion because there's a lot of discussion on this that will be coming. We also saw discussion about it for tires. In British Columbia and Canada, tires are under an EPR system, and of course we've got a system for tires now, so again, that's not our priority. They're being dealt with now, and of course changing a system is much harder than just starting a new system from scratch. And then I think it was also raised for electronics, and of course from the good work of CAW, we do have a good electronics program here in California, but it is the only one now that's run by government on a producer. All the other ones, the 24 other states that passed electronics that followed this bill, which actually paved the way, are producer responsibility systems to varying degrees of success. But those are all things we'd love to see, way beyond monitors covered in an electronic system. We've got copiers and printers and all the electronic gadgets that we all use. We'd love to see those get under an EPR system. And in Europe, they do call it's everything with a current. They started with everything with a cord, but they are everything with a current. So these are things that we'd like to, at least participate in the discussion, and we consider ourselves as thought leaders on producer responsibility. But again, the focus for us is to make sure what we have on the table already works, which is carpet, thermostats, and paint, and we're very, very active in those discussions. And then we'd love to see sharps, which unfortunately we just found out from Senator Smith he's not carrying forward this year. I think that is not unrelated to the issues of pharmaceutical kickback from the ordinance here in Alameda. And also batteries that Senator Corbett tried for 2 years, thanks to Alameda Stop Waste, which sponsored the bill. We almost had it. Again, the influence of money. Hewlett-Packard opposed strongly because they had wanted an exemption for every single product that they made that had a rechargeable battery. As you know, many electronics have rechargeable batteries in them, and that was simply unacceptable, and the bar got too low. So we did not get that bill, but we moved the ball way down the court on electronics and batteries. And now we have a national battery program rolling out that's voluntary, but at least we think the bill helps kick it along. So thanks to CalRecycle, I think the plan's off to a really good start and still has EPR in it. But do know that the Producer Manufacturers Association, the Product Management Alliance, has come in with a letter. They're strongly opposed to any EPR in the AB 341 plan. And if you all are not vocal about pushing back on that, we could very well lose EPR. So I hope you are all very engaged in the AB 341 plan development.
Thanks, Heidi. Scott, let's get to you also, because infrastructure has come up a number of times. Carol mentioned earlier that there's a smelter looking to site in California. Let's talk about the infrastructure issue. Obviously, CalRecycle's got a big role in this. How do we do that? Is it build it and they will come? Is it we do this directed by policy, statute? How do we make it happen?
I think it's probably kind of a combination. Again, just to use organics as an example, CalRecycle adopted their strategic directive to divert 50% of organics from landfills in 2007. And frankly, we haven't done much. We have not been successful in really significantly expanding the infrastructure. Not from a lack of trying, but certainly we have been, and frankly all the stakeholders and advocates have been aggressively trying to find incentives to promote, and incentivize the building of organics infrastructure, but it's been very challenging. There's a number of issues. You've got water board issues, you've got air board issues, you've got local community issues, and you've got the pricing of landfills. Very low average tip fee in the state of California is a predominant factor in the difficulty of building this recycling infrastructure. So I think it's going to be a combination of incentives, funding, and regulation that will ultimately make us successful. Some of the language that Mark has been talking about will require commercial generators of organics to recycle that material. That will be a new step for California if that policy is in place. I think that type of policy, combined with our best efforts to subsidize the infrastructure, will be what's required to make it successful. And that's just in the organics market. I think with the other commodities that have established markets, we've been more successful. But again, those markets tend to be overseas markets. And so if we are going to try and keep those commodities in California, we're going to have to start experimenting, I think, again, with some of these other incentives or regulations to keep some of those materials here. I think the best solution for that, those jobs. Those are significant jobs here in California. And so, again, I think it's communication. I think we're in a very good position here with the governor, who's very strong on jobs right now. And not just talking about it, but actually, willing to use the governor's office to ensure that some of these policies get in place. So I think this is a good window of opportunity for us.
Mark, one of the things that Scott mentioned is legislation. What is it CAW has been thinking about? What's the dialogue that's going on there related to legislation to help improve infrastructure in California, if any?
Well, I'll tell you, I am a big fan of market-based incentives, and money seems to really drive a lot of projects in terms of actually building facilities that process and utilize material here in California. So we've had a good amount of success with the bottle and can recycling law in terms of utilizing that unredeemed money to drive the development of processing operations and manufacturing facilities in California. And as I become, again, we've been very enamored with that policy. And so what we're trying to do is how can we take that concept that has worked well in terms of the bottle and can recycling law and expand that to a broader range of things. So we're looking at how can we identify money to create a financial incentive for communities to develop these composting and anaerobic digestion facilities in their communities. How can we identify money within the e-waste recycling law to make sure that we are fully processing this material, all of this material, e-waste material, and manufacturing it into new stuff here in California. We are looking to, part of our rationale for expanding the bottle and can recycling law to materials outside the traditional aluminum, glass, and PET is because we want to have a pot of money that we can develop processing infrastructure and manufacturing for polycoated paperboard and some of that other packaging material. So I'm very focused on the carrot right now in terms of coming up with resources to drive those policies. In terms of the organics policy, there is a little bit of a stick in that policy. As you know, AB 939 has a requirement that local agencies develop 15 years worth of disposal capacity. And the organics policy that we are working on borrows that same concept and requires each community to have 15 years of organics processing and composting capacity. So that's one of the stick kind of approaches, and that's in the organics policy that we're working on. But again, I think carrots, financial incentives, motivating manufacturers to invest in California, that's going to be the best tool that I can see.
I'm glad you brought up carrots and sticks. One of my philosophies in this industry has always been walk softly and carry a big carrot. The idea of the carrot's so big, we can beat people about the head and shoulders if they don't use it the right way. So, from a local perspective, Gary, you have some pretty big carrots in your jurisdiction.
Wow, that's
It's mostly talk. How's that work for infrastructure?
It's mostly carrots. You know, people see Stop Waste as a leader and see Stop Waste as an energetic agency that gets things done and so forth. But you know, members of our JPA could withdraw if they wanted to. You know, I mean, it's voluntary. So you know, we really can't go beat up on people much. You know. And we used to have lots and lots of carrots. We had a lot more money in the past than now. So it was mostly a carrot-driven organization. And one of the challenges we're facing is we have fewer carrots. We really can't use sticks, you know, in a few cases, but not really very much. So we've been sort of trying to figure out how to live in a carrotless world when carrots were the method, you know, to take your. So anyway, back to infrastructure. Now that we've wandered off track there with metaphors. The two infrastructure issues for us are in-county composting capacity and recycling-based businesses, if you will, processing, beneficiation, and so forth. The in-county composting capacity has been an issue for a long time. We've had strong political commitment to it. All of our composting takes place outside the county. And for the amount of material that's been composted now, that's fine. But there's at least as much material, and maybe twice as much material still going to landfill that could be composted. So at least some of that material should be processed by in-county capacity for political reasons, so that we'll have more political control in the future, so that we can be proud of taking care of some of our own stuff close to home, so we can create some jobs locally, that sort of thing. So we're strongly focused on in-county compost capacity as a next step in our infrastructure, and then next year we hope to be rolling out some contracts or agreements to actually implement that, and putting some money that we have in reserve into there. We have a limited amount of money. It's sort of our last big carrot, and we're looking at getting it eaten in the next couple of years. So that's one area. And we'll be focusing on energy recovery too, because it changes the value equation. The organics going to landfill in this county, if converted to compost, are worth maybe $2 to $3 million a year. If they're anaerobically digested first and then converted to compost, you're talking $23 million a year. 10 times more value if you've got some energy in the equation. So we'll be looking at trying to create some in-county compost capacity preceded by anaerobic digestion. The other area that we don't really do much work in, and we're not going to do that much work in, is the area of recycling-based businesses, if you will, and locating manufacturing or beneficiation or wherever here. We certainly support that, but it's such an issue of local control and local land use that for us to be involved in it more than saying, yes, it's the right thing to do, and yes, we'll help you if you want help, creates more backlash than good. So we really need economic development directors in jurisdictions to say, as Steve Loutsey has so many times, and a few others in the county have said, no, this is good for our community. It's good to have a beneficiating company here. It's good to have glass processing here. It's good to have a paper mill here. It's good, we need people in the economic development world to say that, and we will back them up. But if we take the lead on that, it steps on toes of people who are very concerned about land use authority, which has become it's always been a touchy issue. It's become even more touchy in the last few years with the down economy and the